This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I lived in a small town in Oklahoma, where the houses were spread out, surrounded by woods that seemed to swallow up any sound. It was a school day, and my grandma had picked me up. This was the first year I'd be home alone after school. Before, I would go to my grandma's house, but today, for the first time, I was on my own. I knew my parents wouldn't be back until later. My dad wouldn't be home until around 7 p.m. And my mom, a teacher, wouldn't return until 8 p.m. because of parent-teacher conferences. The sun was still up, the kind of warm, golden glow that felt safe. It wouldn't be dark until 8:30 p.m. I did what I always did, ran upstairs, turned on my Xbox 360, and dove into Minecraft with my friend Seth. We were deep in a building spree when a sudden noise cut through the muffled sound of the game. A car door shutting in the driveway. My pulse quickened. My dad wasn't due for hours, and no one else was supposed to be there. I glanced out the window, my heart thumping in my chest. A red truck sat sideways in my driveway. No one I knew drove a red truck. The man emerged, tall and gaunt, wearing a hat and a camo hoodie that seemed way too heavy for September in Oklahoma. The sight felt off, like a scene from a movie you shouldn't watch alone. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of it. He was heading up my walkway, and when I looked again, he was knocking on the door. Two sharp thuds that cut through the house like gunshots. "Hey, Seth," I whispered, voice shaking. "There's someone at my front door." Before I could explain, the man turned, looking back down the walkway, then shifted and walked past his truck. I was frozen, holding my controller so tightly my fingers hurt. He tried the side door to the garage. The cold sweat prickled down my back as I clutched the controller. "He's at my garage door," I whispered. My pulse roared in my ears. It was still bright out, but the fear settled in my chest like a lead weight. I stood, quiet as a shadow, and slipped downstairs. My bare feet barely made a sound as I tiptoed through the living room. I pressed my back against the wall, ears straining. I heard the metallic scrape of a handle, a thud, like something heavy had dropped to the floor. My mind screamed for me to run to the kitchen, to grab the house phone, but the path was wide open. I'd be exposed. Instead, I stayed, watching as the man moved past the living room windows. A flicker of motion. I dared a glance. The man had moved to the back patio. I swallowed hard and stayed low, muscles tight, waiting for any sound. He tried the door. The thud came again, a heavy, clumsy drop. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized I was too scared to move. I was alone, vulnerable, and I needed help. A few moments later, I peeked around the corner. He was gone. My heart thumped in my chest, relief washing over me like a wave. Then, I heard it. A car door shutting. I hurried back to the window and saw him getting in his truck, taking a slow, deliberate look at the house. He sat there, in his truck, for what felt like an eternity. The back of the truck was open. The only items visible were a crowbar and a shovel. Seth urged me to snap a picture of the license plate, but he was parked at an angle I couldn't see. The man drove away, tires crunching against the gravel, disappearing down the road. A few minutes passed before I ventured back to the patio. My hands were shaking as I inspected the door. The doormat was shifted, the plant pots pushed aside. He'd been looking for something. A key. I stood there, a new cold fear crawling up my spine. What if he'd found it? What if he had come in? The thought made my blood run cold. When my dad came home, he called the police. I told them everything, describing the man, the truck, the crowbar and shovel. They took it seriously, but he never came back. To this day, I still double-check the locks every time I'm home alone. And I never forget the look of that red truck in my driveway. I've never been the kind of person to believe in ghosts or supernatural things, but after what happened that night, I don't think I'll ever be the same. I live in a small, quiet town in the Midwest, where life doesn't stop no matter the hour. It was a cold winter evening, and I was at my desk, sipping coffee, lost in my own world. My mom called out from the living room and asked me to get some medicine for her. Being the procrastinator that I am, I pushed it off, saying I'd go later. Time flew by, and soon it was 11 p.m. The streets were quiet, with that kind of eerie stillness that only comes late at night. I grabbed my jacket, my bike keys, and headed out to the 24/7 pharmacy a few miles away. After picking up the medicine, I felt the urge to go for a late-night ride, something I often do to clear my head. There's a small bridge not too far from my house, surrounded by tall trees and shadowed by the outlines of old buildings in the distance. The bridge has a kind of haunting beauty to it, especially at night. Beneath it runs a creek that, when it's swollen, creates a soft, rushing sound that feels almost hypnotic. Here's where things get unsettling. In our town, the local cemetery is known for being old and mysterious, with rumors of strange sightings. This bridge? It runs right by the cemetery, which has been around since the 1800s. I didn't think much of it. I'm not superstitious, and honestly, I never believed in ghosts. It was midnight when I arrived. I parked my bike near the start of the bridge, lit a cigarette, and put on some music. The cold breeze whispered through the trees, and the distant sound of water below made the night feel surreal. At the far end of the bridge, I noticed the faint glow of a lantern. Someone was there, tending to the graves. I figured it was just a night watchman or someone visiting a loved one, so I stayed where I was and didn't disturb them. An hour passed, and I felt it was time to head home. But to do that, I'd have to pass the area where the lantern glowed. I started my bike and began riding slowly. The closer I got, the more aware I became of the figure by the graves. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. But as I got closer, the shadow became clearer. A man, hunched over with his back to me. I slowed down to get a better look, and what I saw still haunts me to this day. He was scratching his head, violently, as if he was trying to tear his scalp off. His movements were frantic, jerky, and unnatural. His hair was damp and matted, and I could see small streaks of blood on his shirt. He didn't seem to care. He rocked back and forth, making these guttural, animal-like sounds. My heart froze. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my body wouldn't move. Then, he turned. In a flash, faster than anything I've ever seen, he snapped his head toward me. I'll never forget the sound. A sharp, crackling zap, like static electricity. His face was illuminated by the lantern's light, and his eyes were hollow, empty pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. I don't know how, but I managed to kill my headlights and twist the throttle, desperate to get away without drawing his attention. But as I passed him, I felt it. A cold, piercing gaze, as if he was looking straight into my soul. I didn't dare look back. My hands trembled, my body was drenched in sweat despite the cold, and I rode faster than I ever have, praying he wouldn't follow. When I reached home, I locked every door and window, my heart still pounding in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I woke up with a high fever that lasted 2 days. When I finally gathered the courage to visit the bridge in daylight, there was nothing. No signs of anyone, no evidence of what I'd seen. To this day, I don't know if it was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely. But one thing is certain. I'll never go near that bridge at night again.